to the world-famous Bercy Stadium in the heart of Paris for Eurosport's second trip, second adventure, second visit to the mysterious and intriguing world of sumo wrestling. Well, before we get into the action with 32 of the world's top performers and the big names from Japan, it's a chance to take a look inside this sport and also explain exactly how it works. And I'm delighted to sit alongside myself in the commentary box this evening, the Vice President of the International Sumo Federation, Sid Hoare. Sid, welcome to Eurosport once again. And this tournament is a little more spicy than the one you were commentating on last week.
That's right, Nick. Last week we had the Europeans fighting, and it's not an exaggeration to say they haven't got as much experience as these Japanese. Now we're going to see the real thing.
Well, of course, as with all great competitions, there's the pomp and ceremony beforehand. Just before you joined us live, there was a little explanation on the historical side of this sport that really does date back 2 or 3 centuries. An example of Japanese tradition and history in display, as well as some incredible sport. Really good to see the youngsters and the future of this growing sport represented. And also, Sid, it's great to see these heroes of Japan on display in Europe once again. It was some 9-10 years ago that we saw them at the Bercy Stadium last.
It was a big event last time, I remember, because I was there watching it and commentating. And at the stadium in Paris, 14,000 people. They sold the tickets out in about 3 days flat.
So let's have a quick, brief look at the rules. Sid will talk us through each and every one of the bouts. There are 2 groups of 16 in each, giving us 32 bouts. It's a straight knockout competition, and we will be left with the 2 big men right at the end of this evening's programme. There's another competition coming up same time tomorrow evening and on Sunday. So a feast of sumo wrestling, whether you're a fan or not, it really does make intriguing viewing. So we're about to begin with the first round in this international Paris tournament here for sumo wrestling. The rules of the game are really quite simple. You win if you push your opponent out of the ring or any part of his body other than the soles touch the ground by being thrown inside the ring. And Sid, this really is a nice little start to the competition. And perhaps the television pictures often deceive the size of these guys, and this really is putting it in proportion.
Well, this must be about 24 stone versus 3 stone. The Japanese are great at involving kids in some of their demonstrations. They'll take on 1, or they'll take on 2, 3 or 4. I think the little boy's getting some coaching from the side there.
Well, if one could translate what that youngster was thinking every time he turned around to his dad, I'm sure he was saying, "Dad, are you sure this is the one I'm fighting tonight?"
But he lost then. I don't know if he knows it. He lost because his bottom hit the ground.
And the ceremonial bow to say thank you. And some lovely pictures. Well, Sid, we'll be seeing some slow-mos of some of the technical moves, but it is really quite a simple ruling, as we said earlier. The sumo wrestlers looking to put their opponent on the floor within the ring or just simply push them out of the ring. Another youngster takes his chance to get some, well, pretty important sumo wrestling experience. And it's good to see the youngsters involved here, but also, Sid, throughout this competition, as we start to take a look at the starting order, there are some giants and there are some, what we can only describe as smaller giants in this competition.
Yeah, there's some 1 or 2 fellas about, well, from 15 stone up, but the smaller ones tend to be incredibly skillful, and they survive amongst the big fellas by sheer technique. And we should see some good bouts this evening.
Well, as we said, every one of these seats has been sold. It's a capacity audience for all 3 days of the competition. And 10,000 seats really do show the popularity of this sport. Many say it's a spectacle, but it is actually a real institution in Japan, taken very seriously indeed. And these performers that we'll be seeing this evening are true professionals, but like true professionals in any sport, and like all sporting heroes, playing their part to encourage youth within their sport.
Looks like the kids are getting a little bit bigger now, and they've got a little bit of idea of how to do the ritual, which does take a little while to learn. And they're getting a bit of instruction. Don't think he likes the sand on his hands.
Two-on-one doesn't work. But of course, back in Japan, Sid, youngsters throughout the country really do idolize these huge sporting gods. And how would a youngster, not only in Japan, but also here in Europe, go about getting involved in the sport of sumo?
Well, he'd have to go into amateur sumo, obviously, and country by country, it's starting to grow. They have a few junior competitions. In Japan, they have a type of sumo for the junior school kids called Wanpaku sumo, and it's a massive sport in Japan. They had over 50,000 competing last year, primary school level.
Of course, that is part of the aim of bringing over the professionals from the Japanese sumo wrestling world to Europe to not only educate and to perhaps let people know a little bit more about the sporting cultural activities of Japan, but also to encourage youngsters around Europe to perhaps take up the sport, give it a try. Sid, you're very much involved in sumo in the United Kingdom, the president of the British Sumo Federation.
Yep.
And how is our side of things in Britain going? Is it a growing sport, a developing sport?
Yes, slowly but surely it's developing. We had, last year in the World Sumo Championships, we had one of our guys, Bill Etherington, got a bronze medal in the heavyweight division, which is over 115 kilos. And in the European Championships, we placed third in the team event. It's growing slowly but surely. I guess the more professional it comes, the more likely it is to take off, and there are signs that it's heading that way. Amateur sumo in Japan is not as big as pro sumo, and the money seems to make the difference, obviously.
And we'll come on to the earnings and the lifestyle of these gentle giants we're seeing now in action. But it really is a very serious sport in Japan, and they make a lot of money. And it's good to see that there's a smile on everyone's face, because in just a short while we'll be down to serious business. This young lad doesn't really realise how far out that ring he really could be thrown if the gentleman holding on to him really did lose his temper.
I think the young boy's discovering what it feels like to have one of those belts on, the washi, which goes round and through the legs. Not the most comfortable of garments to wear. The numbers are increasing now. I guess maybe he's going to take on all the kids at once. There was a marvellous touch recently at one of the big the bashos, the tournament in Japan. One of the top wrestlers who we'll see tonight, Terao, just had a son, and he kitted him out in sumo gear and took him into the ring and showed everybody in one of the opening ceremonies. Brought the house down. Absolutely amazing.
Well, the crowd certainly are enjoying the performances of these youngsters, having a bit of fun before the event starts. First of all, it's 3, now it's 4. I think they'll all be in there sooner or later. Interesting to note, of course, that it really has got a marvellous tradition, and it's good to see, Sid, that it's fun, the kids are getting very excited, but the wrestler is making them go through the traditional start, and it really is fundamental to this sport that the... He's out.
They won there.
There, 4-1 finally got there. We were just coming on to say there, the Prime Minister of France, President Chirac, and we were just coming on to say that the traditions really do play a fundamental part of this sport.
Just about every aspect of this has got traditions that go back centuries. Which order they enter the ring, from which side they enter the ring, the clothes they wear, the ring itself. Everything is laid down in minute detail. I think we have a change of Now we have Musashi Maru. This is American fighter who's Ozeki rank, just one from the top. Very strong guy. And he's going to take on the two juniors. Musashi Maru, he's about 30 stone. I think what the kids have got to learn is to come out a bit faster than that, because they're not going to move that weight unless they crash into him. Maybe they should run through his legs and push him from behind.
Well, it's not a softy sport, Sid. We were talking about this earlier, and a lot of people, even at Eurosport today, have kind of implemented that these guys aren't real hard men. They're a bit soft, and it's all a little bit of a game, a charade, a big show, one of our fellow commentators was saying earlier. But there's an indication that they have incredible power, speed of movement, and they really are tough players.
Yeah, they're big fellas and they look big and fat, but there's a lot of muscle under that, and they train hard. I mean, they're athletes who train hard but who eat a lot as well, hence the weight. But the ring, for example, is hard. It's hard clay, and it's got abrasive sand on it, so if you're not careful, take the skin off.
Well, a bit of fun before the competition begins, and these youngsters have certainly tried their best to take on some of the top sumo wrestlers from around the world, but there's two almost going at once there. We're up to sort of lads at about 14 or 15 years of age, and they're realizing that these guys really do know their stuff. Some of these giants will be up against each other in just a short while when the competition for the Paris Trophy of Sumo gets underway. We'll take a quick commercial break, but we'll be back with the big men of sumo in just a short while. Stay tuned.
Sport Live.
Well, welcome back to the Bercy Stadium for live coverage of the Grand Tournoi de Sumo of Paris. Some of the sporting celebrities, and France celebrating its recent superb run of medals at the World Judo Championships with a lot of their top performers taking great applause from the crowd. But the stars of tonight's show are not judo athletes, they are not boxers, and they are not stars and celebrities, but they are the top sumo wrestlers from Japan. And Eurosport is delighted to announce that later on in this evening's broadcast, we will be seeing two of the greatest players in the game, two grand champions, and they are Tako Nohana and Akibono. Now, they're split into two groups of 16, 32 of total, and the draw, one has to say, it favors the big guys because they are planned, without any major upsets, to meet at the end of the competition. The two grand champions, who very rarely meet in Japanese competition, will be hopefully our last bout of the evening. It's a capacity crowd here in the Bercy Stadium, and it really will be a cracking evening of sumo wrestling action. Well, alongside myself, Nick Fellows in the commentary box, Sid Hall, who will be guiding us through the action on tonight's show. Also, another competition from 9 till 11 tomorrow evening, and the same on Sunday. So if you don't happen to catch it tomorrow night, you will be able to see it again on Sunday and highlights throughout. Sid, we were talking before the start of this broadcast that there are many, many traditions that really are fundamental to this sport, and it's some of those traditions that we're going to be taking a look at and talking about before we get into the live wrestling competition itself. And it's something that's also very important, not only for the Japanese people and the culture, but also to the fighters themselves.
Yes, it's traditional before a tournament starts that the drum, the taiko, is banged, and usually this is done on the day before the tournament, and some of the officials will go around the streets carrying the drum as well. Here we're having an exhibition in the ring. Usually it's done outside.
Well, in a sport that was first discovered by the Emperor of Japan back in 734 and then was invited into the imperial court, there are very few other sports that can say those traditions have lasted and have been passed on with such accuracy, Sid. They really are almost following the same guidelines and traditions that they were 2-3 centuries ago.
The sumo that you see now was more or less took shape about 300 years ago. And sumo is always changing subtly in different ways. Obviously, the wrestlers change all the time because it's a slippery pole, really. If they win, they get to the top of the pole, but if they lose, they go down. And the traditions change as well. But sumo, or ozumo, grand sumo they call it, as you see now, took shape 300 years ago. Japanese seem to be taking this opportunity to introduce a bit of Japanese culture. The sumo tournaments, the basho in Japan, not normally have this element in it. Outside the big tournament, the Kokugikan in Japan, they have erect a huge tower, and on top of the tower they place the drum where it's banged.
And it really is a special adaptation of the traditional sumo competitions that last over 15 days back in Japan, just 3 nights here, and a much different format than is traditionally shown, but nonetheless really intriguing to see these giants in action and bringing their cultures along with them as well.
Normally with the tournaments they have each day something like 900 wrestlers fight, and they start very early in the morning, and each day the wrestlers have one fight. So over a 15-day period, 15 fights, and what they have to achieve is more wins and losses, and if they get more wins and losses, if they get 8 wins and 7 losses, they move up the rankings, and rankings are the all-important thing.
Well, the crowd enjoying the build-up to this competition and also being talked through the history of the sport by the announcers in the Bercy Stadium in Paris. They were first here in 1986, and it's taken them 9 years to get along today. It's been a disaster, one has to say, for the sumo wrestlers, with the majority of their equipment, some of it very old and very valuable, being burnt down in one of the hold halls at the Charles de Gaulle airport here in Paris. And it's thanks to Japanese airlines that spare gear and belts and traditional and ceremonial dress was flown out in time for this evening's presentation and competition. Otherwise the whole thing would have been cancelled, and around about 50,000 people really disappointed.
A lot of the Japanese, or in fact all of the wrestlers, have these heavily embroidered aprons that they wear for ceremonial ring entering ceremonies, and each apron can be worth 10, 15, 20,000 pounds. So there's a number of those that got burnt up today, so they can't be feeling too happy about that. The ring, the dohyo there, is sacred. It's the sacred arena, and traditionally women are not allowed to enter the ring. And before the ceremony, the ring is blessed by Shinto priests, and sacred salt is scattered to purify it. And purification is one of the key elements of it, the ring. If any blood falls on the ring, there's a lot of time and energy spent wiping it up. They've got to keep it scrupulously clean. In the background, you hear the two sticks being banged together. These are the key sticks, they're called. The evocative sound of sumo reverberates every sumo tournament.
Maintenant, nous allons assister au Doyoiri. Doyoiri, c'est la présentation des Makuchi, lutteurs de niveau supérieur. Je ne suis pas là pour vous donner mon avis, c'est pour moi.
Well, you're with us live in the Percy Stadium in Paris. Myself, Nick Fellows, and Sid Hoare awaiting the beginning of this intriguing competition, the first of 3 nights of world-class sumo competition with 2 grand champions from Japan in action. It's only the 2nd time that we've seen them here in Paris and in Europe. The last was 1986. We're delighted to be able to inform you that 2 of the elite, 2 grand champions are here. Takano Ona and Akabono will be in action. And the way the draw is designed is that these 2 monsters and really fine wrestling athletes will more than likely meet each other in the final. The 32 are split into 2 groups of 16. It's a straight knockout competition, which the rules, well, they're not really that complicated. You just have to push your opponent out of the ring or put him on the deck and have some other part other than the soles of his body touch the floor within that ring. We'll be talking you through the rules and regulations as the competition begins, but briefly, it's a 7-meter square known as the dohyo with a 4-meter 55 diameter circle making up the ring.
Here we see the entry of the wrestlers in their brocade aprons. So obviously they've flown some into Japan, from Japan, to replace the ones that were burnt. There are various ring entering ceremonies. The top Yokozuna, the grand champions, they have their own ceremony, and then the 3 ranks below that, they have their own ceremony, and then the bulk of the wrestlers, they also have their own ceremony. And they enter, they climb onto the dohyo, and then they circle around the ring till they're all in place. Usually they separate out into East wrestlers and West wrestlers. Since there's quite a lot of them, they can't all fit round the ring. Although for this particular tournament, we have less than the usual number. Now, these aprons cost a fortune. £15,000, £20,000, usually donated by wealthy patrons. Can be big corporations, or it can be wealthy individuals, or also, of course, by patronesses. Because these sumo men are top stars in Japan, have many fans, male and female. So one by one, the wrestlers are being introduced, and the announcer is saying in Japanese where they come from. This is the great Konishiki, 44 stone of him, from Hawaii. Although he's now got Japanese citizenship, because without that, he can't go on to make a living in sumo in Japan once he retires. The announcer is also saying in Japanese the stable that they come from. Each of these wrestlers will train in a particular stable with a group of maybe 15 or 20 wrestlers per stable. There are something like 50 stables altogether. Average weight of these top division wrestlers is 24 stone, roughly 24 stone. And that ranges from 44 stone, from somebody like Konishiki, down to 15 stone with somebody like Terao or Kyokudozan. Here you see an interesting little ceremony. They clap their hands to attract the attention of the gods, and then they lift their skirts. Many years ago, they didn't lift the skirts, they stamped the ground, but when the ring filled up, I guess they couldn't do it without kicking each other, so they lift the skirt instead.
Well, it really is amazing to see the variety of sizes in both body mass and height, and we'll be looking into perhaps some of the characteristics that make the most effective. And it's interesting to note that even though Konishiki is the biggest, he's not on the form guides the favourite for tonight's competition. So it is a balance of weight and power, but also a lot of skill out of those 70 techniques, which we'll be talking about later. This is the second half of the draw, the other 16 who will work their way separately through and not meet anybody from the first draw until the semi-finals, and then on to the final with the last two competitors.
Many years ago, the wrestlers used to fight in these aprons, but I think they very quickly discovered that they got in the way, so the aprons now are only used for ceremonial. On the apron, sometimes you see the wrestler's name, more often than not, you see the patron's name. In Japanese, of course.
Really beautiful, these aprons, lined with gold leaf, and as Sid was saying earlier, it really was heartbreaking for not only the wrestlers themselves, but their patrons, sponsors, and for the whole sport, for this disastrous fire in one of the major holds in the Charles de Gaulle airport. And perhaps, Sid, as many were not as damaged as badly as we thought, or really all credit to the organisers and the sponsors of this event to get flown over in time. Another full set of regalia for each and every one of the competitors.
Of course, these wrestlers, they have, many of them will have several, 10, 15 of these aprons, so if they lose a couple over here, it's not such a disaster. But of course the problem is getting some over here. Well, obviously Japan Airlines have stepped in, and it's only 12 hours away, so they've done the wrestlers fine.
And also seeing the 16 giants gather around gives you an indication of this 7-meter square. It's around about 60 centimeters high, and to keep it all stable is the earth that is, or usually plays a very traditional part, but of course impossible to bring 32 tons of earth over from Japan as well, but it gives the whole thing a very solid and robust appearance. Of course, in design, it is there to be more spiritual, to be almost recreated as a temple, but I can assure you that it really does take an amazing thud when these gentlemen throw each other over.
That clay is hard, and it's covered with a rough abrasive sand, so it skids a little bit, but it also takes the skin off if you're not careful. Yes, it takes about 8 truckloads of 4-ton truckloads of clay to make these, make the dohyo, and about 5 days to knock it into shape. As you can see, the ring's not that big. When 2 big men are in there, there's not a lot of room to move.
Of course, sumo wrestling over in Japan is a huge television sport over there, with the Japanese broadcaster NHK showing 90 days of action each year, and it really is an institution with Japanese viewers. And these guys said when they are off or have a day off, they're off the screens. They really are like rock stars, like Hollywood gods, and perhaps even more famous than we would expect of our sportsmen over here in Europe.
That's right. They say that Takanohana, for example, who's the young grand champion, is the biggest star in Japan. Wherever he goes, he's chased by fans, bigger than pop stars. Now this is the Yokozuna Dohyo Iri. This is where the grand champion comes in, flanked by 2 attendants. Takanohana in the middle there,
And this really is what's made this event so special. Takonohana, known as Noble Flower, so rarely seen out of Japan. And of course, the big favourite for top honours in these 3 nights of competition.
There are 2 ways of doing this ceremony. There's the Shiranui style and the Wakano style, and one's said to be defensive and one's said to be offensive, and they're drilled for days in this. They've got to get it right, and in Japan, when they do this, which they do in every tournament, when they stamp the ground, the fans cry out. That's when the leg goes up. So we've obviously got some Japanese in the crowd there. Yes, it's the Shiranui and the Unryu style. 2 styles, they don't differ very much, but the cognoscenti, they know the difference. It's where they place the hands on the chest that makes the difference.
And again, Sid, all the tradition, the sword being held by one of the entourage, and also the dagger, you were telling me earlier, in the referee's belt. Should he make a bad decision, he's expected to...
Harakiri. Although I don't think he does it in the ring, because they're a little bit careful about polluting the ring. He's expected to retire to a dark place.
Well, I hope we don't see any of that this evening, and I'm sure that the guests in the Bercy Stadium and the viewers on Eurosport will see some fantastic sumo wrestling. But it really is lovely to see these great champions over here. And now we should be taking a look at the second of the 2 grand champions. This is the American, originally from Hawaii, the 26-year-old Taro Akabono.
The 2 attendants that you see there, one is called the Tsuyu Harai, which means the dew wiper, which I think in this case means the sweat wiper. And the other one who carries the sword is called the Katana Mochi, and the carrying of the sword is meant to show that the wrestlers have samurai status.
Well, the ceremony now performed by the other grand champion, huge favourite. And Sid, we were talking earlier, this gentleman perhaps is one of the few wrestlers that's responsible for quite a major shake-up in the world of sumo. An outsider coming in, beating the Japanese in their national sport, and also, of course, reaching that level of grand champion.
Yes, he's the first foreigner to reach the top level, and he did it purely on merit. He beat everybody, and the Japanese, of course, wanted to see one of their own come through, and now, finally, Takonohana is coming through. He's tending to win the tournaments now ahead of Akibono, but to be fair, Akibono's had a couple of bad knee injuries, and he's had operations on them. That's 35 stone those knees are carrying, so they do take a bit of stick.
231 kilograms, 2 meters and 3 in height. Of course, Akabono, 3 years the senior to Takonohana. And if the form book is correct and the draw goes the way we certainly expect it to, they are the 2 grand champions. They are the best that Japan has at the moment, and those 2 should meet each other by the end of our broadcast here this evening. But it could all go wrong, and sometimes, like in all sports, the smaller guys or the not so well-known guys can cause an upset.
The difference between winning and losing in sumo is very small. It's a small ring, a certain victory, with the other fellow on the edge, bending over backwards, looks like he's going to fall out, and then suddenly the pusher finds, like a door that suddenly opens, that he goes flying out. So you can never be sure who's going to win.
And if we go back to Japanese competition, the last time that these two grand champions met was in September, and the younger performer, Takanohana, was the victor over Akibono. But of course, they'll be meeting possibly in 3 separate competitions over this festival here in Paris this evening, tomorrow and Sunday evening, all live on Eurosport, exclusive to our pan-European viewers, and you'll be able to see throughout the weekend whether these grand champions can live up to their name, and maybe some of the champions, some of the Ozeki, the rising stars of the sport, can take their chance in front of a European audience and take away a victory from the superheroes of sumo wrestling. Well, the lights are dimmed once more whilst the wrestlers prepare. The traditional regalia will be taken off and the wrestling belts will be put on. It gives us a chance to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be back with the competition live and exclusive to Eurosport. Sumo wrestling coming up after the break. Well, welcome back to the Bercy Stadium, and live television is, as they say, live television. There's a slight delay in the proceedings before the competition gets underway, with the top 32 sumo wrestlers from around the world all gathered underneath the lights of the Bercy Stadium. But before then, we're going to have a look at some of the opening ceremony actions from earlier on this evening, and we'll also give our resident expert Sid Hoare in the box here a chance to explain not only the fundamentals of the sport, but also those all-important traditions. The Japanese party here to the Bercy Stadium of Paris, the Japanese national anthem.
This is called the Kimi ga Yo. It's the reign of the emperor.
Japanese national anthem played to welcome 40 of their top sumo wrestlers. 32 have been chosen to compete in this evening's competition. As we said earlier, if you've only just joined us here for this live broadcast from the Bercy Stadium, 2 groups of 16, which will be whittled down to 2 finalists. It's a straight knockout competition in this sumo wrestling, a slightly adapted European format, one can say. And of course, our expert in the box here, Sid Hoare, waiting patiently for the action to begin. We had a first visit to sumo at the European Amateur Championships last week, Sid, and this is slightly different atmosphere and the side of the sport from the professional point of view rather than the growing amateur ranks.
Yes, that's right. I mean, for a start, they're fighting on the clay ring, and in the amateur game, especially in Europe, we tend not to fight with the clay ring. It just takes too long to make, to create, and to cost a lot of money as well.
Well, from the amateurs, we take a chance. We're hoping to get some pictures of the close-up of the ring, how it all works, the rules involved, and also some of the traditions that really do make this mystical sport so intriguing. Talk us through it, Sid. This, of course, the top, or held up above the ring, and it emulates the temple where the sport was first originated.
This temple-like construction over the ring is called the tsuriyane, or the hanging roof, or also called the yokata. Originally, the sumo was fought outside, and the roof was supported on 4 pillars, one from each corner. Well, sumo grew more and more popular, and the spectators grew in number, and they complained that they couldn't see the action with the pillars in the way. Also, of course, the judges sat by the pillars just inside, and these are ex-wrestlers of huge girth, and that further obscured the spectators' vision. So, Japanese innovation, they decided, well, we'll hang the roof, take the pillars away and hang the roof overhead, which of course became possible when they started to hold the tournaments indoors in the mecca of sumo, the Kokugikan. Here you see the bits and pieces in the corner of the ring where the wrestlers first go to. There's the water in the wooden bucket, and it's called chikara-mizu, which means power water, strength water. But it's not used to have a quick drink if you're feeling thirsty. It's used to purify, so the wrestlers take a sip and they spit it out. It's bad form to drink it. And they have also hanging there is the white bits of paper, and this is called chikara-kami, which means power paper, and the wrestlers can wipe themselves down. Obviously, if a wrestler's covered in sweat, it's an advantage, so they're not meant to cheat, so they wipe themselves down before they go in.
And from the outside of the ring, Sid, to the ring itself, we've talked about the clay and the soil, but what of this circle that really is the key to the sport?
Circle is 4.55 meters across, and in the middle of the circle there are 2 lines which are drawn, and that's the start lines, what they call the shikiri-sen, which when the wrestlers crouch down, they place their hands, their knuckles on. They can't start closer than that. They can, if they wish, start further back, but mostly they start on the line. If you think about it, it's 15 foot across the ring, 4.55 meters, and you start back from the center, so when the wrestlers crouch there's only about 3 or 4 feet behind them, and a determined rush by one wrestler can send the other one over the edge of the ring in no more than 2 or 3 steps. So it's very tight indeed. It doesn't look tight, but it is. And within that short space, the wrestlers, as they're pushing or being pushed, will seek to twist or turn or sidestep, dodge out the way, anything to avoid being knocked down inside the ring or shoved outside. Most of the victories, most of the wins, are by pushing the other wrestler outside with a technique known as yorikiri. This accounts for maybe 40% of all victories. 4 out of 10 wins are with the yorikiri, force out. But altogether, there's a wide range of techniques. Traditionally, there's what they call the shiju hate, or the 48 techniques, but in fact there's considerably more than that if you take into account all the arm movements and the defensive movements and the foot movements and so on and so forth. Some experts say there are close on 300 movements in sumo. The ring, it's made of a special clay, and in Japan it comes from a place called Arakida, and every tournament the ring is rebuilt.
Well, before we join the competition, we take a look at the practice match. This was shown earlier on in the evening's activities, an opportunity for the house announcer to let the crowd know exactly what they would be seeing later on tonight. And it was our opportunity to take a look at some of the techniques and for Sid to continue to explain this quite complicated sport. It may be simple once the two performers get up there, but there really is a great deal to be taken in before the simple throwing or pushing of one's opponent onto the floor or out of the circle begins.
Yes, the announcer is saying in French, explaining to the home crowd basics about the sumo, and the referee, first of all, the man in the darker coloured traditional Japanese gear there, he's called the yobidashi, the announcer. Yobidashi has several functions, one of which is to help make the ring, but here he calls out the names in a kabuki style voice, and he turns from side to side and he calls out the East fighter and the West fighter, which is the two groups they're divided into. Then, as the names are called out, the two wrestlers enter the ring, bow, turn around, and stamp the ground. Shiko, this is called. This is the traditional method for training the legs in sumo. In any sumo session, the wrestlers will maybe do 300 or 400 of these leg stamps. The referee now also comes in, and also in the same high-pitched kabuki voice, kabuki theatre in Japan, the traditional theatre, he calls out the names. And then the wrestlers, they scoop a handful of salt, chuck it into the ring to purify it, squat upright. This is called the Sonkyo squat. It's an old samurai way of bowing to higher officials. And then they begin the countdown to the fight. This is where they go through a series of rituals. And as they do this, the tension builds up. So finally, when the timekeeper says go, then they crash into each other. Start with this ritual, which is called the shikiri, is they crouch down and just eyeball each other. And it's said that the shikiri is used to concentrate the power and also the mental concentration of the fighters. So they're not just going through a meaningless ritual, they're thinking about what they're going to do, thinking about the man they're going to fight, perhaps thinking how they're going to fight him, and they're winding themselves up for that burst when the referee indicates time's up and they know they've got to go for the real thing. But also, of course, the way if they're injured at all, doing some of these rituals is quite painful, and one fighter would look at the other one and think, well, is he injured? Can he bend his knees? Is there any weaknesses there? So it's psychological time, very testing time. It takes normally from the time the yobidashi, the first announcer, calls out the names of the wrestlers, it takes 4 minutes before they go, and then there are various signs which indicate that it's time to go, and the referee will indicate these, and there we go. Now the referee encourages the fighters, he makes lots of noise, and they're not going too hard now, it's more of a demonstration bout, and the bigger wrestler simply lifts the other one up, suridashi, hoist, throw, walks to the side, and dumps him outside. The losing wrestler retires quickly, doesn't hang around, but the winning wrestler crouches down and receives the kachi no nori, which is the win verdict.
It really does seem amazing that there is so much pomp and ceremony before the actual battle begins, but it's probably understanding, considering that this sport is now easily 3 centuries old, and with exception perhaps to modern diet and training techniques, hasn't really changed at all.
No, it hasn't hardly changed. The wrestlers do maybe 1 or 2 modern things like weight training, and their foods change slightly, they still eat lots of it.
So there was a quick look at the demonstration sport, or the demonstration bout, which hopefully gives you a little more of a clearer understanding into the way this form of wrestling works, the importance of the rituals and the history associated with sumo wrestling. And we now await the first group of 16 to make their preparations with haste, one hopes, so that the competition can get underway. We're a little over an hour behind schedule now. Our apologies for those of you that have been with us since the beginning and starting to feel that we're dragging it out. We are certainly not in control of the event. And, well, Sid, I don't think the organisers, to be honest, really want to push these guys around and hurry them along too much.
The Japanese sumo guys, in my experience, don't like, they do it their own way. You know, they're big fellas and they take their time, and sometimes the Japanese come across as super efficient. Other times, well, you know, you wonder. But, well, just the way they do things.
And I'm sure that one or two organisers in the Bercy Stadium not saying it quite as politely as that right now. It is worth sticking around for, I can assure you. These guys are very strong, it's very dynamic, and a bout can last up to 3 to 5 minutes. It can be over in 3 to 5 seconds, and it really is amazing to see. Some of these performers have meanings to their names, and there's the two brothers here, which is a really pleasant story. The Taka Nohana, who is the grand champion, and he has a brother, Waka Nohana, and Noble Flower is the older brother's Taka Nohana's name, and then the other brother's name is Young Flower, which I think Young Flower for the younger brother, which I think is very nice, and we haven't just made that up. That really is the truth, and some very interesting stories behind some of these very traditional names. There is a close-up of the two starting blocks. The crowd, well, are starting to take their seats once again, and let's hope that we can finally get this competition underway. We waited a long time to see it, and perhaps, Sid, it's why because of the delay and because these guys don't want to be pushed and rushed around, that it really will only grow to the professional extent of sumo millionaires and the size of the sport in Japan, only in Japan. It takes 90 days of filming for NHK, and I don't think football gets 90 days, and it's our national sport, and maybe that's why it's perhaps not as big over here in Europe as I know you would certainly like to see it.
There are one or two limitations to it. I mean, just simply building a ring each time, a dojo, which is 5 days to make, 3 days to break down, costs a fortune to make, nobody else can use it. It's not the ideal sporting surface. But some people, some Japanese, say that no foreigner can ever do sumo. Yet, if you look at this event, if you look at the Japanese sumo tournaments, you see Americans at the top there, and they do everything the Japanese way, and there's no complaints. So we could catch on. Certainly sumo without ritual and ceremony is not sumo.
Well, of course, Sid Hoare here in the commentary box plays a very important role in the development of this sport, both in Europe and the United Kingdom. He's the president of the British Sumo Federation and the vice president of the European equivalent. And if you have any questions or have an interest in getting involved in this sport, they don't have to be big monsters, do they, Sid? Please write to Sid Hoare, care of Eurosport, at 55 at Drury Lane, London. And Sid will have all your letters passed on to him, and he will get back to you, advising you where your local gym is, where the local club is, how you can get involved, because as we look at some of these pictures here, it looks like the kids really enjoyed it.
I don't think that kid's enjoying it that much. Yeah, I'm sure he is. Yes, it takes a bit of getting used to these belts, these mawashi. Their new belts are a bit rough, but once you've worn them and they've molded to your body shape with the body heat, they're like wearing swimming trunks, and they just slot on very snugly. It's almost unnatural for kids sumo, really, because the rules are so simple. I mean, you put them in a circle and say, right, push the other one out, or push him down inside. I mean, it's the sort of game that you can do almost from the beginning. I mean, there's a lot of technique in it, which you have to learn. The good ones are really good and very difficult to beat, but you can start doing it almost right away.
And of course, one worthy note and major difference between the amateurs and the professionals, which we'll be witnessing later on this evening, is that there are weight categories in the amateur ranks. Rather, they're all pitched in together here in Japanese professional sumo.
Yes, there are 3 weight divisions in the International Sumo Federation, which is amateur. It's heavyweight is over 18 stone, 115 kilos, and then the middleweight is under 115 kilos, and then the lightweight is under 85 kilos. So put that in English stone. If you're under 13 stone, 13 and a half stone, you can go in the lightweights. If you're under 18 stone, you can go in the middleweights. And over that, you can be any size you like. Size is not necessarily a guarantee of victory. You've got to be big, you've got to be strong, and you've got to be able to move it. And you don't, I mean, guys with a big beard up are not necessarily going to do any good, because they've got to have a strong pair of legs to hold it up and hold the other guy up, and that's the catch.
So I'm sure there's many a Eurosport viewer watching in the local pub right now. There's no excuse to have another pint. You've got to do a bit of muscle training on the legs as well. So welcome to the Bercy Stadium for the first of 3 nights of top quality competition from the mysterious world of sumo wrestling. If you've been with us over the past hour, you will have seen all the intrigue, all the ceremony and all the cultural history that is attached to this very colourful and entertaining sport, as we now await for the start of the first evening's competition with 32 of the top sumo wrestlers from Japan, or a few who have come from America and since gained Japanese citizenship, to find who will claim the trophy of Paris for 1995. 86 was the last time that the top sumo wrestlers performed here in Paris, and once again the crowd have come in their hordes to welcome these Japanese giants. It's a full house for Friday, Saturday and Sunday night's competition, and there will be 3 separate events in each of those 3 different days.